You are listening to an After Dinner Conversation magazine podcast. After Dinner Conversation believes humanity is improved by ethics and morals grounded in philosophical truth, and that truth is discovered only through intentional reflection and respectful debate. In order to facilitate this process, we have created a growing series of print books, a monthly short story magazine, and 2 different podcasts. This podcast, Philosophy, Ethics, Short Story Audiobooks, provides audiobook recordings of stories that have appeared in our magazine. And our companion podcast, Philosophy, Ethics, Short Story Discussions, is where we discuss the ethics of the choices made in the stories as a way to model the kinds of conversations we hope you're having about these readings with friends, family, or students. We would love it if you went over to check it out. I'm Roberta, your narrator and one of the acquisition editors at After Dinner Conversation Publishing. Thank you for spending your time listening to our podcast and for reading the magazine. Thank you for supporting us through your magazine subscriptions and through patreon.com/afterdinnerconversation. And of course, if you enjoy this audiobook reading, please subscribe to our podcast, share it on social media, and suggest it to friends. Today's story is StarStuck, written by E.L. Tenenbaum and published in our March 2021 magazine. StarStuck by E.L. Tenenbaum. They thought the boy odd from the day he was born. He had 2 eyes, 2 hands, 2 ears, 2 feet. But what confused the Great Purveyors of Reason to no end was that he giggled, even when no one was looking, even without cause. He was the first baby born in 1,000 years in the great sky of reason, so they had forgotten what youth was truly like. There above Earth's mountains and deserts and beaches, all live by the strict dictates of logic, and the slightest flickering of impulsiveness, of emotion, was pounced upon and dissected until it was reasoned away. The Great Purveyors could not risk allowing these feelings to get better of anyone, for it caused people to act irrationally or without forethought. Such behaviors were the bane of reason, and thereby had to be eliminated to maintain equilibrium of the mind, which was by far the most commonsensical way to live. The boy grew older, and his smiles only increased as he discovered the world around him. His oddity became more apparent as he delighted in obscure little things, like the feel of grass between his toes, the trickle of rainwater through his hair, the squish of mud between his palms. He chased after fireflies without a jar. He built castles in the sand even though waves washed them away. His parents struggled to understand their eccentric little boy who laughed even though he had no knowledge or philosophy or understanding of pleasure, joy, and happiness. Even once the boy was old enough to walk and talk and ask reasonable questions, his imagination remained unhindered. Finally, after a long rational discussion in which they reasoned with their despair of ever raising a logical man, they brought him to the Great Purveyors at the Great Observatory of Reason and left him in their sensible, capable hands. The boy watched his parents' retreating forms, uncertain as to why he wasn't leaving with them. They had told him it was a great honor to be with the Purveyors at the observatory, but all he wanted was to go home and lay on his back in the meadow as clouds sprang to unexpected life overhead. Still, even this unforeseen development could not dim the sunshine on his personality for long, and he stood delighted in exploring the new world he was part of. For a while, the boy was the greatest mystery of reason the Purveyors ever faced. "Why do you smile?" they inquired of him. "Why not?" he replied. "There is much pain and sorrow in the world, a world much bigger than anything you can imagine," they explained. "But I don't feel pain or sorrow right now," he observed. "Yet you have once, and you will once again," they countered. "Now that you know of it, you cannot forget it. So, cannot 2 things be true at once?" Some time later, the Purveyors tried again. "Why did you just laugh?" they questioned him. "Because I'm happy," he said. "Is it a relief at puzzling out a complex equation? Have you reached a long-sought conclusion?" "No." A gift? A surprise? A serendipitous discovery? No, I'm just happy. These answers exasperated the purveyors to no end because they didn't give reason enough to their being. Eventually, the boy learned to hide his laughter and his smiles, and if he was ever caught, he found it best to keep it simple. Why did you just grin? They challenged. Because, he rejoined, which befuddled them beyond words. One day the boy stumbled upon the Seer's Walk overlooking the Great Observatory. From there he caught sight of a room that caught his breath in awestruck wonder. From their very tips to their very tops, the walls were lined with shelves and shelves of carefully arranged glass bottles. In the very center of the room was a giant blue and green orb over which the great purveyors stood and sprinkled shimmering dust from bottles selected from the shelves. Smaller versions of the great orb dotted the rest of the room, and purveyors would turn the globes this way and that before choosing the dust of a particular bottle. The boy was midway down the stairs to the main floor when a great purveyor blocked his wandering path. "What are those?" he asked, amazed. "Those are bottles of emotions," the great purveyors explained. "What is emotion?" the boy wanted to know. He raised his hand and fluttered his fingers. "Why do they do like so?" "Emotion," the great purveyor explained, gesturing to the bottle, then the orb, "obstruct logic and reason. It leads men to act without considering consequences. It clouds the mind and hazes sound judgment. We are duty-bound to watch closely over earth and take measures to ensure no one forgoes careful thought and acts impulsively." He punctuated this last line with a shudder. The boy nodded sagely, though he understood very little. He left the room alone, as he knew he should, though sometimes he was sure he heard strangled sounds leaking from the many bottles on the walls. Such a notion was truly absurd, especially as it was irrational to think that dust could make any sound. But that didn't stop him from keeping one eye on the bottles when he hid in the Seer's Walk to observe the purveyors at work. Over the years, he watched the purveyor, with a predilection for patience, sprinkle some on a judge presiding over a second-time offender, over a mother whose toddler scribbled on the walls yet again, over a man waiting on hold with customer service for almost 3 hours. As the months passed, he watched the purveyor who preferred compassion dust some around the little girl who found a stray cat, around a nurse caring for a dying patient, around a businessman buying dinner for a starving man. For hours he watched the purveyor whose hand usually reached for joy dash some on the woman holding a baby who had made her a mother, on a friend receiving a surprise gift, on a child misjudging his jumps over puddles. He watched all this and wondered why this honored work felt so terribly misaligned. No one had sprinkled dust on him before he laughed. No one had scattered bottled emotion over his head before he cried. He knew better than to ask, so he kept such thoughts tucked deep inside himself and only pulled them out for examination in the quiet hours when he was absolutely sure he was absolutely alone. In time, the boy grew into an exceptional student of reason, despite a small smile that hardly fled his face for long. Still, the great purveyors were rather reasonably proud of him, and many logically predicted a future with an imminent appointment as a great purveyor in the Great Observatory of Reason. The boy, now a young man, heard their words and tried to remain humble. No dust needed. He worked hard. He excelled. There was no reason to feel any pride when his achievements were little more than the logical outcome of dedication to his studies. When induction day finally dawned, the young man awoke with jitters in his gut. It had been many years since he had seen his parents, but he had been told that they would be there. It was illogical to feel any sort of nerves at all, he reminded himself. Whatever would be, and he could do little to change it now. But he couldn't help himself. Moreover, he didn't want to. He liked the feeling as if his stomach was a giant net trapping dozens of wildly fluttering butterflies. He liked feeling something other than the even keel of rational thought and planned emotion. When his name was called, the young man humbly bowed his head and accepted the medal of his new position. He then dared a peek at his parents' face, searching for a trace of pride or recognition. Today they will take me home, even if I do smile without forethought. But they didn't single him out for any special attention. They applauded him in the same polite manner they applauded the handful of other honorees. Why? He mused. Because he realized he belonged to the Great Purveyors now. The observatory was his home, and that's where he belonged. So logically, he couldn't also belong to his parents. He had succeeded just as his teachers had deduced he would, thereby completing the equation they'd already solved. Never mind why he'd worked so hard to succeed at all. The young man shoved his feelings away. He knew what bitter sounds disappointment and rejection made. By now he was convinced of the restless noises he heard from the bottles, and he didn't want his emotions taken away and sealed up beside them. He walked through the rest of the steps of the ceremony without a second glance at the people who had given him the most ultimate gift of life. After, he started work in the Great Observatory and obediently went about his duties as expected. He sprinkled restraint on a girl whose daddy finally came home for more, bidding her wait until he called out for her. He speckled gratitude on an employee whose boss grudgingly gave him an extra paid leave to deal with his wife's death. He scattered acceptance over a college football team before they stepped out of the tunnel for their biggest game yet, one they were more than likely to lose. And so it went, and so it was. The young man dutifully, reasonably, sensibly went about his job of sprinkling the dust of emotion on the scenes appearing in his globe. Then, one day, for no reason at all, none that he could formulate at least, he stopped his hand just before the dust fell on a parent whose teen came home with a bad report card. Something he could not name. Curiosity, he would later realize, bade him to wait. So instead of sprinkling the dust of patience and the dust of obedience, he watched. Would they fight? Would he raise his voice? Would he make excuses? The parents were having a hard time with this teen, so it would not be the first time that the young man's dust would intervene and calm their emotions. Except the young man did not interfere, and it took one look at the paper for the parent to lay into his teen, questioning his desire for a favorable future and reminding him that college looked at everything and not just the last year of school. He had to get into the right habits now, and for such a smart kid, he sure was making some very poor choices. The teen yelled back that he wasn't understood, and maybe he could get something done if someone was just there to help him every once in a while. He didn't think like everyone else. Words muddled in his brain. Music soothed it. The teen stormed out. The parents stared after him. The young man watched the parents' impatience melt into concern. That night, the father and mother sat with their son and spoke about his future. They asked what would help him succeed, and it was decided he needed a shift in academics. The parents spoke to the school counselor. They spoke to the principal. They gave a little, he gave a little, and a new course of study was mapped out. The young man observed the teen for the next few months, wanting so much to know what would become of him. From his designated place, far above the teen's world, he sat with him in the silence of night and felt the frustration, the determination, the music that pervaded this teen's soul. He listened as he sang his essays for English. He swayed as he beatboxed his way through science. He watched as the boy finally backed away from the edge of the academic abyss. The day came when the teen brought home a new report card. It was less than stellar. It was better than it had ever been. The young man kept a vial of understanding, a vial of concession close at hand. The teen showed his parent his grades. The parent considered it carefully. The teen watched, anxious. The parent whooped and embraced the teen wholeheartedly. The young man set aside his vials. From then on, he stopped sprinkling dust on the world below him, even though it didn't always work out so well. There were times when he didn't stop anger from leading a father to strike his son. There were times he didn't interfere with greed, before it led a man to steal. There were times when he didn't dissipate jealousy before it caused a girl to turn on a friend, when anger and hatred and love and lust overrode all reason and led to disastrous results. He had never before acted in such defiance of reason. He had never before felt so alive. Until one day, he was caught furiously pacing the Sears Walk, thinking about the non-look on his parents' face in a memory from graduation that had never quite left his mind's eye. That image rubbed at his heart, and he couldn't quite let it go, despite all reason that said he should. Because in the past few months he had seen that the pride parents felt toward their children was a dust that was rarely used by any of the great purveyors. He saw it illuminate their faces as they watched their child's piano recital, as they filmed every second even though the song was barely 12 bars long and the child had little musical talent. There was no reason for them to be so proud, and yet they were. He saw it again and again at baseball games, at weddings, at promotions, at awards. No matter what the family was like, the parents almost always beamed uncontrollably for their child, responding to effort and spontaneity and stillness with unfettered love and joy and delight. "Is there any explanation for this behavior?" interrupted the voice of a senior purveyor. The young man stopped his pacing short. "My mind is ill at ease." The purveyor smiled kindly. "Let us take it for a walk together," he suggested. "Surely we can return it to the way it should be." The way it should be. For the first time in his life, the young man's smile faltered. The way it should be. All at once, the young man understood what hadn't been right all along. Stifled, but still simmering inside, was resentment for the life he had been raised to. He didn't want to sprinkle emotion on people and tell them how to react. He wanted to see what they would come up with, to see what irrational, impulsive, immediate actions were like. He wanted them to choose to learn how to balance feeling and reason to achieve the most favorable results. So no, he didn't want to talk out his frustrations. He wanted to do something about them. Before the purveyor could stop him, he shot off the Sears Walk and made straight for the repair closet. Unlike every other day, he didn't control his pace, and he didn't keep his voice low as he thundered. "The way it should be? This is the way it should be." Burning with determination, he yanked open the door and grabbed the first thing his hand could grip, a hammer. Then he raced to the Great Observatory of Reason, and without thinking twice, without thinking it through, ignoring all consequences and reason and deliberation, he raised his hand above his head and with great force gave free rein to his emotions, and smashed and bashed every bottle he could reach. When he could reach no higher, he shook the shelves with all his might, until the bottles came falling down and shattered all over the room. "What have you done?" the great purveyors cried with highly reasonable levels of indignation. The floor was sandy with littered shards of glass, but even worse, so many little pieces tumbled onto the earth orbs. They seeped and stuck in that dark expanse called sky, dangling up above before they could meteor shower onto the inhabitants below. Earth winced. People ran outside. They looked up, and they were filled with awe. Joy, anger, pity, mercy, pride, contentment, sadness, serenity, all sprinkled down. The young man was very logically banished to a moon hovering over the world, where he was to forever watch what his foolish act had wrought. It would take years and years to once more collect enough dust of bottled emotions. And so the young man had put the denizens of earth at peril of forgetting the strict tenets of reason. But each time he sees a world brimming with emotions, feelings, and life, with choice of reaction and with shakily contrived balance of reason and emotion, he smiles, and he laughs so his joy illuminates the pieces of glass in the sky. On crickety nights, In the countryside, older couples step out to their porch and gaze up at the infinite night sky. They see stars twinkling above and think on just how blessed their lives have been, without being made to think so. From the rooftops of bustling cities, stifled teens sprawl on their backs and look upward, ever upward, of their own accord. They seek out glimpses of the stars and imagine just how big the universe really is, just how small they really are, and just how much they want to be part of something greater. In quiet suburban homes, spouses impulsively meander outside and spare a glance above, losing themselves in the lights flickering overhead. They expel their anger on calming breaths and realize just how tiny their rage, their frustrations, their worries are. Here and there, all over the world, people observe the stars and they see the world is vast, the world is full, but what they feel has once been and will be again the world over. And whether those who look up drown in their depths or burrow in the cocoon of their warmth, what they feel is real and part of the moment they live in. They are awash in the moment, permitting it to overtake them before rationally resuming their lives. Because with all this, somehow, somewhere, still deep inside, they know that nothing is without reason. Not even the shimmering stardust scattered across the vast and gleaming sky. Now for the discussion questions. Number 1. The boy believes it is an error to sprinkle reason to smooth out the emotions of humans. Do you agree with him? Number 2. Humans likely have emotions and reason because they each serve an evolutionary purpose. What do you believe is the evolutionary purpose of each? 3. Do you personally wish you had more reason or emotion in your actions? What do you think you would get by having more of the one you believe you are lacking? Number 4. Did the boy sin by allowing people to feel and act on harmful emotions that caused violence to others? And 5. Do you think humanity is becoming more, less, or the same, a species of reason? Do you think that trend will continue forever? That was StarStuck, written by E.L. Tenenbaum. Next week we'll be reading Survival Kit by Christine Seifert. If you enjoyed this story, head over to our companion podcast, After Dinner Conversation Discussions, and listen to our discussion of this and other short stories from our magazine. We will include a link in the description. And of course, you can always continue the discussion on our webpage, in the comment section, or on our Facebook page. Thank you for joining us. And until next time.